I'm Catherine, 29 female. For as long as I can remember, the two-story house on Maple Avenue has been my entire world. It's where I took my first steps, where my dad taught me to ride a bike, and where my mom planted the rose bushes that still bloom every spring. It was more than just a house. It was the keeper of my memories, the silent witness to my life's happiest and saddest moments. But in a cruel twist of fate, the one person I should have been able to trust became the architect of my biggest nightmare, threatening to tear it all away. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The scent of freshly cut grass and my mother's prize-winning roses always welcomed me home. It was a fragrance that clung to the very walls of the house on 12 Maple Avenue, a scent I associated with safety, love, and an unshakable sense of belonging. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living, breathing part of me. Every scuff on the hardwood floor in the hallway told a story, the time I tried to roller skate indoors when I was 7. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracked my growth from a tiny toddler to a gangly teenager. The large oak tree in the backyard, with the tire swing Dad hung for me, was my confidant, its branches holding secrets I'd whispered to the wind. My parents, both loving and hardworking, had poured their souls into this home. They weren't wealthy by any means. My father was a high school history teacher and my mother a nurse. They had saved every penny for a down payment, and their joy the day they got the keys was a story my dad loved to tell. They believed a home was the foundation of a family, a stable ground where roots could grow deep. After they passed away in a car accident just after my 21st birthday, the house became my sanctuary. The grief was a suffocating wave, but within those familiar walls, I could still feel their presence. I'd sit in my dad's favorite armchair, running my hand over the worn leather, and almost hear his gentle voice. I'd bake my mom's famous apple pie in the kitchen, the aroma a ghostly embrace. The house was my anchor in a stormy sea of loss. My uncle, Kyle, my father's younger brother, was named the executor of their will. He had always been a peripheral figure in my life, the uncle who showed up for holidays, told loud, unfunny jokes, and always seemed to be in some kind of financial trouble. He ran a small, struggling car mechanic shop on the outskirts of town. He and his wife, Rachel, lived a life that always seemed to be teetering on the edge of chaos. The will was straightforward. My parents left everything to me, their only child. The house, their modest savings, and their life insurance policy were all mine. However, there was a stipulation my parents had added out of a sense of familial duty. Kyle, who was perpetually in debt, had been given the right to manage the property until I turned 30. They had reasoned that a young woman in her early 20s, reeling from grief, might not be equipped to handle the financial responsibilities of homeownership alone. They thought Kyle would act as a responsible steward, a protective figure who would guide me. It was a decision born of love, but one that would prove to be a catastrophic misjudgment. In the beginning, things were fine. I was finishing my paralegal studies and was grateful not to have to worry about property taxes or insurance paperwork. Kyle would stop by once a month, collect the mail, and make a show of inspecting the property. "Just keeping things in order for you, Catherine," he'd say with a pat on my shoulder, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. I paid him a small management fee from my own salary, something he insisted upon for his time and effort. I was young and naive, and I trusted him. I saw him not just as my uncle, but as the last connection to my father. My best friend Harry, a talented architect who had grown up next door, was more skeptical. He'd known Kyle for years and had always been wary of his slick charm and desperate energy. "Are you sure you can trust him, Kat?" Harry would ask, his brow furrowed with concern. The guy could sell ice to an Eskimo and then charge him for the freezer. I would always defend Kyle, brushing off Harry's worries. "He's family, Harry. He's just trying to help." Harry would just shake his head, a silent "I told you so" hanging in the air. The years passed. I graduated, got a good job as a real estate paralegal, and started building my life. The house remained my constant. It was my haven after a long day at work, the place where Harry and I would have movie nights and where I felt closest to my parents. The management arrangement with Kyle became a routine, a background noise I barely noticed. I was content, and I believed the house would be fully and legally mine in just a few months, on my 30th birthday. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a certified letter. It was from a property development company I'd never heard of, Apex Holdings LLC. I opened it, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The letter was cold and clinical. It stated that the property at 12 Maple Avenue had been sold and that the new owners required the premises to be vacated within 30 days. I read it again and then a third time. It had to be a mistake. A sick joke. I immediately called Kyle. He didn't answer. I called again and again. Each call went straight to voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep into my veins. I drove over to his mechanic shop, my mind racing. The shop was a grimy, cluttered space that smelled of oil and despair. I found him underneath a rusty sedan, his legs sticking out. "Kyle," I yelled, my voice trembling. He slid out slowly, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "What's going on?" I demanded, holding up the letter. "Why did I get this? You can't sell the house. It's my house." He finally met my gaze, and his expression was one I had never seen before, a chilling mix of pity and cold indifference. "It's done, Catherine," he said, his voice flat. "The house is sold. I got a good offer, a great one actually, paid off all my debts." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gasping for air. "Your debts? What about me? This is my home. You had no right." "I had every right," he sneered, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "I'm the executor. The will gives me the authority to manage the property, and managing it means selling it if it's a good deal. It was a financial asset, Catherine, not some shrine." He tossed the greasy rag onto a workbench. "You've got 30 days to get your things and go. It's not your problem anymore." And with that, he turned his back on me and slid back under the car, his message clear. The conversation was over. I was dismissed. I stood there for a long moment, the smell of oil and betrayal burning in my nostrils. The man I had trusted, the man my parents had trusted, had just ripped my world out from under me for a quick payday. The anchor that had held me steady for so long had been cut loose, and I was adrift in a sea of shock and rage. The fight for my home, for my past and my future, had just begun. The 30-day deadline loomed over me like a guillotine. Each sunrise was a painful reminder that I was one day closer to losing everything. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every room was filled with ghosts of a life that was being stolen from me. I wandered through the halls in a daze, touching the furniture, tracing the patterns on the wallpaper, trying to memorize the feeling of home before it was ripped away. Sleep offered no escape. My nights were plagued by nightmares of packing boxes and the final, gut-wrenching sound of the front door closing behind me for the last time. My conversations with Kyle were futile. He was a brick wall, unmoving and unsympathetic. "The deal is done," he'd repeat in a monotone voice over the phone, refusing to meet me in person. "You need to be realistic, Catherine. It's just a house." "It's not just a house," I would scream back, tears of frustration streaming down my face. "It's my life, it's Mom and Dad's legacy." His response was always the same cold, dismissive sigh, followed by the click of the line disconnecting. His wife, Rachel, was no better. When I went to their house, hoping to appeal to some sense of decency she might have, she met me at the door with a frosty glare. "Kyle did what he had to do for our family," she said, her arms crossed defensively. "You're a grown woman. You can find another place to live." Her words were like daggers, each one piercing the fragile hope I had left. Harry was my rock during this time. He was there every day, his presence a quiet, steady comfort. He made me eat when all I wanted to do was stare at the wall. He listened to my rage-filled rants and held me when the grief became too much to bear. "We're going to fight this, Cat," he insisted, his eyes blazing with a fierce loyalty that warmed my frozen heart. "There has to be something we can do. We need to see a lawyer." He was right. My paralegal training was in real estate, but this was beyond my expertise. I needed someone who specialized in probate law, someone who could dissect my parents' will and find a loophole, a mistake, anything that could invalidate the sale. The problem was, legal battles were expensive, and Kyle had control of the estate's finances. The money from the house sale was likely already in his hands, and my own savings were modest. I felt trapped, powerless. One evening, as Harry and I were sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, a sleek, black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit step. Out, he was tall and imposing with an air of corporate ruthlessness. He walked up my driveway, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel, and introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, a representative from Apex Holdings. "I'm here to discuss the transition," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "We understand this is a difficult time, but we need to ensure the property is vacated by the deadline." He spoke of my home as if it were a commercial property, a line item on a spreadsheet. His detachment was infuriating. I told him the sale was fraudulent, that my uncle had no right to sell. He simply raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his cold eyes. "Our legal team has reviewed the paperwork," he said dismissively. "The executor, Mr. Kyle, had full authority. The sale is ironclad. We will be taking possession of the property on the 1st of next month. If you have not vacated by then, we will be forced to begin eviction proceedings." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. After Mr. Thompson left, I completely broke down. The finality of his words, the cold, corporate machinery that was now set in motion, crushed the last of my fighting spirit. I curled up on the porch swing, the same swing my dad had pushed me on as a child, and sobbed. Harry sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, letting me cry it out. "He's wrong," Harry said softly, his voice a low rumble. "There's always a way, Kat. We just haven't found it yet." His unwavering belief in me, in us, was a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. The next day, desperate, I decided to do some digging of my own. As a real estate paralegal, I had access to property records and legal databases. I started with Apex Holdings LLC. What I found was unsettling. They were a shell corporation, registered just 6 months ago. They had no online presence, no history of other property developments. Their registered address was a P.O. box in a neighboring state. It was a ghost company designed to be untraceable. This wasn't a normal sale. This was something shady, something designed to be hidden. My legal mind began to kick in, pushing through the fog of grief and anger. Why would a developer use a shell company? To hide the true identity of the buyer. But who would want to hide their identity? And why this house specifically? It was a nice house, but it wasn't a mansion or a prime piece of commercial real estate. It didn't make sense. I spent hours poring over the county's property records, cross-referencing names and dates. I pulled the file on my parents' will from the probate court archives, reading it over and over until the words blurred together. I was looking for anything, any small detail that could give me leverage. It was late at night, my eyes burning from staring at the computer screen, when I found it. It wasn't a loophole in the will itself. It was a single sentence in the original deed to the house, a document my parents had signed 35 years ago. It was a right of first refusal clause. It stated that if the property were ever to be sold, any direct descendant of the original owners, meaning me, had the right to be formally notified of any offer and given the opportunity to match that offer within 60 days. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the legal foothold I needed. Kyle had not notified me. He had not given me the chance to match the offer. He had violated the terms of the deed. The sale wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. A surge of adrenaline shot through me, replacing the despair with a white-hot fury. He hadn't just betrayed my parents' trust, he had broken the law. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his authority as executor, that he hadn't bothered to do his due diligence. He had overlooked the one thing that could bring his entire scheme crashing down. I printed out the deed, my hands shaking with a mixture of excitement and rage. I had him. I finally had him. The cold betrayal had left me shattered, but in the wreckage, I had found a weapon. Now, I just needed to find the right person to help me wield it. The discovery of the right of first refusal clause was like a shot of adrenaline to my system. For the first time in weeks, the suffocating fog of despair began to lift, replaced by a clear, sharp sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter, armed with the one thing my uncle had arrogantly ignored: the law. The next morning, I called Harry, my voice buzzing with an energy he hadn't heard in a long time. "I found it, Harry," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. I found a way to fight back. I explained the clause to him, the legal jargon flowing effortlessly from my paralegal mind. He was ecstatic. "This is it, Kat. This is the leverage we needed. What's the next step?" The next step was clear. I needed a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. I needed someone sharp, experienced in property law, and preferably someone who wouldn't charge me a foe. Artoon I didn't have. My mind immediately went to Fiona. Fiona had been a close friend of my mother's. She was a retired property lawyer, a formidable woman in her mid-60s with a razor-sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. She had sent a beautiful wreath to my parents' funeral and had told me to call her if I ever needed anything. I had been too lost in my grief to take her offer seriously at the time, but now her words echoed in my mind. I found her number and called her, my heart pounding. I briefly explained the situation, my voice cracking with emotion as I recounted Kyle's betrayal. Fiona listened patiently, interrupting only to ask pointed, clarifying questions. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He did what?" she finally said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "That greedy, short-sighted fool. Catherine, can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Bring every piece of paper you have. The will, the deed, that letter from the shell company, everything." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had an ally, and a powerful one at that. Fiona's office was in her home, a beautifully restored Victorian house filled with books and antique furniture. She greeted me at the door with a warm hug that felt surprisingly comforting. She led me into her study, and for the next 2 hours we went over every document, every detail. Fiona's legal mind was a thing of beauty. She dissected the paperwork with a surgeon's precision, her eyes scanning the lines of text, absorbing the information. When she read the right of first refusal clause in the deed, a slow, grim smile spread across her face. "He never even read it," she murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. "He saw the executor title in the will and thought he was king. This, Catherine, is his Achilles heel." She explained the legal ramifications to me in clear, concise terms. The sale to Apex Holdings was voidable. Because I was not formally notified and given the chance to match the offer, the entire transaction was built on a foundation of sand. We had the legal grounds to file an injunction to stop my eviction and a lawsuit to invalidate the sale. "But it's not that simple," she warned, her expression turning serious. "They will fight back. Apex Holdings, whoever they are, will have their own team of lawyers, and Kyle will get nasty. This will be a battle." She then asked the question I was dreading. How much did he sell the house for? I didn't know. The letter from Apex didn't state the price, and Kyle had refused to tell me. "We need to find out," Fiona said, her fingers drumming on her desk. "That information is crucial. It's a matter of public record, but it can take a few days to appear in the system. In the meantime, we need to find out who is behind this Apex Holdings." We spent the rest of the day strategizing. Fiona agreed to represent me pro bono, a gesture of friendship to my late mother that brought tears to my eyes. Our first step was to file the injunction. Fiona drafted the documents with breathtaking speed and efficiency. The next morning, we filed them at the courthouse. The injunction would legally prevent Apex Holdings from evicting me while the case was ongoing. It was a temporary shield, but it bought us precious time. As expected, the backlash was immediate. I received a furious call from Kyle. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he bellowed into the phone. "You're ruining everything. I had a deal." "You had no right to make that deal," I retorted, my voice steady and cold. For the first time, I wasn't the crying, pleading niece. I was an adversary. "You broke the law, Kyle. You should have read the fine print." I could hear him sputtering on the other end, a mixture of rage and panic. He wasn't used to being challenged. He had always seen me as a gullible kid he could easily manipulate. The realization that I was fighting back and that I had the law on my side had clearly shaken him. A few days later, the sale price of the house appeared in the public record. My jaw dropped when I saw the number. He had sold it for a fraction of its market value. The house was worth at least $500,000 in the current market. He had sold it for $200,000. It was a fire sale price. Why would he do that? I asked Fiona, completely bewildered. "He's either an idiot or he's desperate," she said, her eyes narrowed in thought. "Or both. He needed cash and he needed it fast. He took the first lowball offer that came his way. This strengthens our case, Catherine. It shows he wasn't acting in the best interest of the estate or of you, the beneficiary. He was acting in his own selfish interest." The piece of the puzzle that was still missing was the identity of the buyer. Who was behind Apex Holdings? Why the secrecy? Why the lowball offer? It felt like there was a bigger game being played, and I was just a pawn. Harry, with his architect's mind for details and systems, took on the task of digging deeper into the shell company. He spent hours online, navigating through a maze of corporate registration sites and public records databases. It was tedious, frustrating work. Most of his searches led to dead ends, to more P.O. boxes and registered agents who were just names on a form. But Harry was persistent. "There's always a loose thread," he said, his eyes glued to his laptop screen. "You just have to pull on it long enough." He was right. After days of relentless searching, he found it. A tiny, almost insignificant detail in a corporate filing document. The name of the authorized signatory on Apex Holdings Incorporation papers. The name was Rachel. My aunt, the woman who had looked me in the eye and told me to find another place to live. It wasn't some faceless corporation that had bought my house. It was them. Kyle had sold the house to his own wife, using a shell company to hide the transaction for a fraction of its value, effectively stealing my inheritance right out from under me. The betrayal was deeper, darker, and more calculated than I could have ever imagined. The revelation that Rachel was behind Apex Holdings was a gut punch. It transformed the situation from a simple case of greed into a calculated, malicious conspiracy. They hadn't just sold my home, they had orchestrated a fraudulent scheme to steal it for themselves. The low sale price suddenly made perfect, sickening sense. Kyle had sold the asset of the estate to his own wife for a pittance, planning to pay off his debts with the cash and then own my valuable, mortgage-free home outright. They would then be free to sell it at its full market value, pocketing a massive profit. My inheritance would be their windfall. The anger that had been simmering inside me erupted into a raging inferno. The hurt I felt. T was profound, a deep, aching wound left by the two people who were supposed to be my family. But overriding the pain was a cold, hard resolve. They had underestimated me. They had seen a grieving, naive young woman, an easy target. They were about to find out how wrong they were. "This changes everything," Fiona said, her voice grim when I told her what Harry had found. "This is no longer just a civil matter of an invalid sale. This is fraud. This is collusion. This is a criminal offense." Our strategy shifted. We were no longer just trying to get my house back. We were going to expose them, to hold them accountable for their deliberate criminal actions. Fiona explained that we needed more than just the corporate filing. We needed to build an airtight case, to gather evidence that would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kyle and Rachel had conspired to defraud the estate. The investigation began in earnest. Harry, who had a knack for seeing patterns and connections that others missed, took the lead on the digital front. He delved into social media, public records, anything he could find online that might link Kyle and Rachel to the scheme. I, on the other hand, focused on the paper trail. As a paralegal, I knew how to navigate the labyrinthine world of legal documents and financial records. Our first target was Kyle's finances. His desperation for money was the motive for this whole scheme. If we could prove he was in dire financial straits right before the sale, it would strengthen our case. I started by looking into his business, the car mechanic shop. It wasn't hard to find evidence of its decline. A quick search of online reviews revealed a slew of recent one-star ratings, with customers complaining about shoddy work, overcharging, and rude service. A search of court records showed several lawsuits filed against him by unhappy customers and unpaid suppliers. He was being sued left and right. The business was a sinking ship, and he was drowning in debt. Next, I looked into their personal finances. It was more difficult, but not impossible. I remembered my dad complaining once that Kyle was always taking out second mortgages and high-interest loans. Using my knowledge of property records, I was able to find records of multiple liens against their small, run-down house. They were mortgaged to the hilt, living far beyond their means. They were desperate. Harry, meanwhile, was making progress on his end. He discovered that Rachel had quit her job as a receptionist a few weeks before the sale of my house. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. She had likely quit in anticipation of the financial windfall from selling my home. He also found something else, something that made my blood run cold. On Rachel's social media profile, which was mostly private, he found one public post. It was a picture of her and Kyle, taken a month ago, standing in front of a luxury car dealership, grinning from ear to ear. The caption read, "Celebrating our new beginnings. Big things are coming." They were celebrating the theft of my home before they had even finalized it. The sheer arrogance was staggering. We were building a solid case, but we needed a smoking gun, something that directly linked Kyle's actions as executor to Rachel's shell company. Fiona suggested we subpoena the bank records for both Kyle and Apex Holdings. A subpoena was a legal order that would force the banks to turn over the documents. It was a bold move, but Fiona was confident that given the evidence we had already gathered, a judge would grant it. While we waited for the subpoenas to be approved, I did something I had been putting off. I went through my parents' old things, which were packed away in boxes in the attic. I was looking for anything that might help, any old financial documents or letters that might shed more light on Kyle's character. It was an emotional journey. Every photo, every letter was a memory. I found old report cards, my childhood drawings, and letters my parents had written to each other. Tucked away in a box of my father's old teaching materials, I found a thick file labeled Kyle. My curiosity piqued. I opened it. It was filled with documents from over the years. Letters my father had written to Kyle, begging him to be more responsible. Copies of checks my father had written to him, bailing him out of one financial mess after another. There was a loan agreement, drafted by my father, for a significant sum of money he had lent Kyle to start his mechanic shop, a loan that, according to a note my father had scribbled in the margin, had never been repaid. My father had kept a meticulous record of his brother's recklessness and ingratitude. But the most damning document was at the very bottom of the file. It was a letter from a lawyer, dated 5 years ago. It was a formal notice that Kyle had been removed as the executor of my grandfather's will due to financial mismanagement and a conflict of interest. He had a history of this. He had tried to pull a similar stunt with his own father's estate. My father had known, and he had stopped him. This was the smoking gun. This proved that Kyle was unfit to be an executor, that he had a pattern of abusing his position for personal gain. My parents, in their grief-stricken state after my grandfather's death, must have forgotten or chosen to forgive, giving him a second chance he never deserved. It was a devastating mistake, but one that would now be his undoing. With this new evidence, our case was not just strong, it was undeniable. We now had proof of his financial desperation, the fraudulent nature of the shell company, and a documented history of his untrustworthiness as an executor. The investigation had yielded more than we could have hoped for. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. Armed with the file from my father's attic, I felt a seismic shift in my confidence. We didn't just have a strong case. We had a narrative, a history of Kyle's deceit that was impossible to ignore. Fiona was ecstatic when I showed her the file. "This is it, Catherine," she said, her eyes gleaming with a lawyer's predatory excitement. "This is the nail in his coffin. A judge will not look kindly on an executor with a proven history of misconduct." The subpoenas for the bank records were granted. The documents arrived a week later, and they told the story we expected. The $200,000 from the sale of my house had been deposited into the Apex Holdings bank account, an account for which Rachel was the sole signatory. Within days, the money had been moved. Large sums were used to pay off the liens on their house, to settle the lawsuits against Kyle's business, and to pay down maxed-out credit cards. And then there was the most brazen transaction of all. A $50,000 down payment on a brand-new luxury SUV, the same one they had posed in front of on social media. They were spending my inheritance with a reckless abandon that was both foolish and insulting. With this mountain of evidence, Fiona laid out our plan. It was a two-pronged attack. First, we would proceed with the civil lawsuit to have the sale of the house declared null and void, based on the right of first refusal clause and Kyle's gross misconduct as executor. Second, and this was the masterstroke, Fiona would take our evidence to the district attorney's office. "What they have done is textbook felony fraud," she explained. "By selling an asset of the estate to a shell company controlled by his wife for far below market value, Kyle has committed embezzlement. They could be facing serious jail time." The thought of Kyle and Rachel in prison was a sobering one. My goal had always been to get my house back, not to see my family members behind bars as much as they deserved it. But as Fiona reminded me, their actions had consequences and they needed to face them. They had left me with no other choice. Our plan was to use the threat of criminal charges as leverage. Fiona drafted a letter to Kyle's lawyer, a small-time attorney who was clearly out of his depth. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It laid out our case in meticulous detail: the fraudulent sale, the shell company, the conflict of interest, Kyle's history of misconduct, and the damning bank records. It concluded with a simple, non-negotiable offer. They had 48 hours to sign a contract that would unwind the sale of the house, return every penny of the $200,000 to the estate, and have Kyle immediately resign as executor. In return for their full cooperation, Fiona would consider not taking the evidence of criminal fraud to the district attorney. We were giving them a way out, a chance to avoid prison, but it would cost them everything they had tried to steal. While we waited for their response, I felt a strange sense of calm. The frantic energy of the past few weeks had been replaced by a quiet, steely determination. I had done everything I could. I had fought back with intelligence and tenacity. Now the ball was in their court. Harry, ever the supportive friend, helped me prepare for the next phase. "When you get the house back, Kat," he said one evening, "you should make it your own, renovate it, change it. Don't let it be a monument to the past. Let it be the foundation of your future." He started sketching out ideas, his architect's passion ignited. He envisioned an open-concept kitchen, a larger master bathroom, a beautiful new deck in the backyard. Seeing his excitement, his vision for my future in that house, helped me to look beyond the current battle and dream of what was to come. The response from Kyle's lawyer came just hours before the deadline. It was a short, terse email agreeing to our terms. They had folded completely. The threat of criminal charges had been too much for them. They were greedy and cruel, but they were not stupid enough to risk jail time. The next day, we met at Fiona's office to sign the documents. Kyle and Rachel were there, looking pale and defeated. They wouldn't look at me. Kyle, who had always been so loud and boisterous, was silent, his arrogance replaced by a sullen resentment. Rachel looked like she had been crying for a week. They signed the papers without a word, their hands trembling slightly. As they were leaving, I spoke to them for the first time. "I want you to know," I said, my voice clear and steady, "that Dad knew. He knew what you were. He kept a file on you. He bilayed you out, he helped you, and you betrayed him just like you betrayed me." Kyle flinched as if I had slapped him. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and hatred. He knew exactly what file I was talking about. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He just shook his head and walked out, Rachel scurrying behind him. It was over. I had won. The house was mine again. Kyle was no longer the executor. The money they had stolen was being returned. It was a total victory. But as I stood there, watching them leave, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I just felt a profound sense of emptiness. I had my house back, but I had lost the last remnants of my family. The battle was won, but the war had left its scars. The legal victory, while immensely satisfying, was only half the battle. The house was legally mine again, but the emotional toll of the ordeal lingered. The feeling of violation was hard to shake. Kyle and Rachel's betrayal had tainted my home, leaving a bitter residue in every room. Harry's words echoed in my mind. "Let it be the foundation of your future." He was right. I needed to reclaim the house not just legally, but emotionally. I needed to purge the bad memories and create new, happy ones. The first step was to change the locks. The simple act of turning a new key in the front door was surprisingly empowering. It was a symbolic gesture, a declaration that this was my space and I was in control. The next step was a massive-scale cleaning and decluttering. Harry, ever the loyal friend, rolled up his sleeves and helped me. We spent an entire weekend going through every room, every closet, every drawer. We packed away some of the more painful reminders of the past and rearranged the furniture, giving the house a fresh, new energy. As we worked, we talked. I confessed to Harry that while I was relieved to have the house back, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. "What if they try something else?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They're not going to," Harry said firmly. "They're broken, Kat. You broke them. They have nothing left to fight with." He was right. Kyle's business was in ruins, and they were facing financial devastation. They had sold the new luxury SUV at a loss and were likely going to have to sell their own house to stay afloat. They were in no position to cause any more trouble. A few weeks after the signing, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It was from Fiona. Inside was a check for $200,000, the money from the sale, now returned to the estate, and a final official copy of the deed, now solely and indisputably in my name. Holding that document in my hands was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the physical manifestation of my victory, a testament to my resilience. But there was another document in the envelope, one I hadn't expected. It was a letter from the bank that had held my parents' mortgage for 30 years. It was a notice that the mortgage had been paid in full. I stared at the letter, confused. My parents had been diligent about their payments, but I knew there were still a few years left on the loan. How could it be paid off? I called Fiona, my mind racing. "Fiona, I just got a letter saying the mortgage is paid off. How is that possible?" Fiona chuckled on the other end of the line. "Ah, yes, I forgot to mention that. It seems, Catherine, that there was a life insurance policy tied to the mortgage, a mortgage protection policy. When your parents passed, the insurance paid off the remaining balance on the loan. The house is yours, free and clear." The news was so unexpected, so overwhelmingly positive, that I had to sit down. My parents, in their infinite wisdom and love, had protected me even after they were gone. They had ensured that their home would truly be a sanctuary for me, unburdened by debt. The knowledge filled me with a profound sense of gratitude and love. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later. I was at the grocery store when I saw Rachel. She looked terrible. Her face was gaunt, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she had aged 10 years in the past month. She tried to avoid me, but I blocked her path. "I just have one question, Rachel," I said, my voice calm and even. Why would you do it?" She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the floor, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "He was going to lose everything," she mumbled. "Shop, the house. We were drowning. He said it was the only way." "So you decided to steal from your dead brother's daughter?" I asked, my voice laced with ice. She finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "He said you'd get the money, that you'd be fine. He said you didn't need the house anyway." The pathetic excuse, the self-serving justification, was almost laughable. They had convinced themselves that their desperation gave them the right to destroy my life. There was nothing more to say. I just shook my head and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the aisle. The story, however, had one final, delicious twist. A month later, Harry called me, his voice bursting with excitement. "You are not going to believe this," he said, laughing. "You know that big development project happening downtown? The one that's been in the news for months?" I knew the one. A massive new commercial and residential complex was being built, a project that was set to revitalize the entire downtown area. "Well," Harry continued, "I just found out who the primary investor is, the one who is funding the whole thing." "Who?" I asked, intrigued. "Alastair Finch," he said. Alastair Finch was a name I recognized. He was a semi-retired property developer, a legendary figure in the local real estate scene, known for his shrewd investments and his Midas touch. "Okay," I said, "but what does that have to do with me?" "Alastair Finch," Harry said, pausing for dramatic effect, "is the sole owner of a little company you might have heard of, Apex Holdings LLC. It took a moment for the information to sink in, and then I started to laugh. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Alastair Finch, the brilliant, ruthless developer, had been the one to make the lowball offer on my house. Kyle, in his infinite stupidity, had thought he was pulling a fast one on some anonymous shell company. In reality, he had tried to swindle one of the most powerful men in the city. Finch had likely seen the property, recognized its undervalued potential, and made a quick, low offer through his shell company, a common practice for him. He probably hadn't even given it a second thought. But Kyle's fraudulent actions had brought the whole deal into the light, forcing Finch to back away from the sale to avoid being embroiled in a messy legal battle. My uncle, in his pathetic attempt to get rich quick, had inadvertently cheated himself out of a deal with a multimillionaire. The irony was so perfect, so utterly satisfying, it was almost poetic. The final reveal wasn't just that I had won, it was that Kyle had lost in a way he would never even fully comprehend. He hadn't just been outsmarted by his niece, he had been outplayed by a master, a consequence of his own blinding greed. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The house on Maple Avenue, once a source of pain and conflict, was once again my sanctuary. With Harry's help, I began the renovations he had dreamed up. We knocked down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room, creating a bright, open space filled with light. We installed a new deck in the backyard, perfect for summer barbecues. We repainted the walls, planted a new garden, and slowly, piece by piece, we transformed the house into a reflection of me, of my future. It was still the house my parents had built, still filled with their love, but it was also mine in a way it had never been before. It was a home I had fought for, a home I had reclaimed. The news of Kyle and Rachel's downfall spread through our small town. They had to sell their house to cover their debts, and Kyle's mechanic shop finally went under. They moved into a small, dingy apartment on the other side of town. I would occasionally see them, looking like ghosts of their former selves. They never acknowledged me, their eyes always downcast, their faces etched with the bitterness of their defeat. I took no pleasure in their misery, but I felt no pity either. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. My own life, in contrast, was blossoming. My career as a real estate paralegal was taking off. My experience with my own case had given me a newfound passion and expertise in property law. I was sharper, more confident, and my bosses had taken notice. I was given more responsibility, more complex cases, and a significant raise. Harry and I, who had been best friends our entire lives, found our relationship deepening. The crisis had brought us closer, forging a bond that went beyond friendship. One evening, as we were sitting on the new deck, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, he took my hand. "I think I've been in love with you for about 20 years, he said, his voice soft. It just took me a while to realize it. It turned out I had been in love with him too. It was a quiet, comfortable love, built on a foundation of years of friendship and unwavering support. It felt as natural, as right, as coming home. The sweetest revenge, I learned, wasn't about watching my enemies suffer. It was about my own happiness. It was about building a life so full of joy and love that their betrayal became nothing more than a footnote in my story. It was about turning the symbol of their greed, my home, into a testament to my strength. One day, about a year after the lawsuit, I received a letter in the mail. It was a handwritten note on cheap, lined paper. It was from Rachel. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she wrote, her handwriting shaky. "But I want you to know that I am sorry. Not a day goes by that I don't regret what we did. We lost everything and we deserved it. I hope you are happy. You deserve to be." I read the letter, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something other than anger towards her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I put the letter away and didn't answer it. Her apology was for her, not for me. My healing had come from within, from my own strength and the love of the people who truly mattered. The house on Maple Avenue is no longer just a house. It's a symbol of resilience. It's a home filled with laughter, with the smell of Harry's terrible cooking and the sound of our future being built, one day at a time. My uncle tried to take my past from me, but in doing so, he gave me a future I could have never imagined. He wanted the house for its monetary value, but he never understood its true worth. It wasn't an asset to be sold, it was a legacy to be cherished. And in the end, that was a lesson he learned the hard way. I had lost a part of my family, but I had found myself. I had fought for my home, and in the process, I had built a new one, stronger and more beautiful than ever before. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.